The BCN Liberation Triangle. Black Christian nationalism seeks to change society in order to accomplish the liberation of black people, and realizes that we as a people are engaged in a struggle for power and for our survival. We utilize the BCN Liberation Triangle as a godly symbol to Kasanyawatu and bring black people together to create oneness and unity amongst our people, to build a nation within a nation, where we control our own institutions that governs our lives. The Liberation Triangle is a symbol of Cody, where we voluntarily tax ourselves to fund the black nation, and is the financial basis of building a nation. The Liberation Triangle is also a symbol of Kazi, which is communal work and responsibility, where we collectively work together on a common program that's designed to liberate the African diaspora from the oppression, exploitation, and brutality of our colonial oppressors. Through Kasanyawatu, Kodi, and Kazi, we will once again build the kingdom of heaven on earth for our people throughout the African diaspora. As black Christian nationalists all over the world, we pledge to let the power of the Liberation Triangle work its wonders in us, to take the power of the Liberation Triangle to African people across the world. May God and the black nation be our witness that we exist to take black Christian nationalism to black people everywhere.
Amen. Amen. Raise up a nation that will obey. That's God's struggle in every generation, to raise up a nation that will obey. We obviously live in a world where God is having a very difficult time raising up a nation that will obey. Certainly the turmoil and chaos and disaster and suffering and pain that seems to be everywhere means that God has no point of entry into this time of ours that we share. We live with so much exploitation of man against man, so much hunger and so much misery and death and destruction. It's a witness to God's difficulty to break into this age. Maybe we have created an age more immune to God and more indifferent to God and more opposed to God than any other. Though we have so many big meetings in great auditoriums and coliseums with people proclaiming a great faith in God, you could not tell by what is going on outside those coliseums that God has anything to do with this world. And so obviously our great professions of faith don't indicate any real concern or obedience to God, any relationship to God that could make life righteous and holy. This morning, I want to spend a few moments in our last sermon in our tribute to Marcus Mosiah Garvey for the month of August. The topic has been, where is the black man's government? This morning, I want to speak on the subject, God, religion, and the Black Revolution. God, religion, and the Black Revolution. Now, I know if you're old-time Baptist or whatever, you don't even know how that even could be a sermon, right? How do you put all that together? God, religion, and the Black Revolution. I'm going to try real hard to put it all together. Our scripture lesson came from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verses 6 through 20. The whole book of Deuteronomy is a major theological work with an emphasis on reinforcing to the nation Israel the centrality of God to their identity and existence as a people. Deuteronomy makes absolutely clear that their hope of deliverance from any earthly bondage they would endure is tied to God and the covenant agreement. The covenant agreement is something that Israel had as a core of their life. And as long as they maintained the covenant by living in obedience to the law, the nation would prosper and prevail over their enemies. And so we find in Deuteronomy 5:32 and 33 these words, "You shall be careful to do therefore as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in the way which the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land which you shall possess." And so the idea of the writer is to get Israel to understand that if they did what God said they should do, they would prosper. They would be successful. They would have the things that a people needed to have life meaningful for them. The covenant agreement meant that Israel had to be constantly wary of separating their future freedom and prosperity in the promised land from the will and power of God. They must never move to a point of foolishly thinking that it was solely through their own effort and not God's power that the deliverance was won. And so we find in our scripture lesson in verse 17, "Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth." They had to be careful when they got into the land and defeated the enemies and got the spoils of victory to think that somehow they did it and they didn't have anything to do with God, that they could have done it with or without God. That's always a problem in religion, because people are the most religious when they have the least. When they have the most problems is when they're the most religious. When their problems are reduced and they begin to get a little bit, they begin to get less religious. They begin to go to church a little less often. They are less concerned about putting something into the church or committing themselves to the church. It's only when the world has beat them down do they reach their hands out to God and begin to pray, because they feel so helpless. It's amazing how many people become religious in prison. A whole lot of people are converted in the penitentiary. Or a whole lot of people are converted in hospitals when the doctor comes in and says, "I saw a spot on your lung. It looks like a big tumor. It could be cancer, and we don't know if we can do anything about it." And everybody starts calling out to Jesus, "Oh, God, help me." Everybody wants to reach out to God when they feel helpless in terms of the condition they live in. The writer tries to get Israel to understand that as they achieve because of God, they must remember that it was because of God that they won this prosperity and not forsake God. Separating their deliverance as a nation from the will and power of God would cause the nation to become slack and irresponsible to the covenant and their obligation to live in accordance with the law. If they felt that God did not affect their deliverance, then what obligation would they feel they had to God? If they said, "I did it," then why would they have to be agreeable and obedient to God? Why should they abide by the covenant and make the personal sacrifices to live together as the people of God if they figured that being the people of God had nothing to do with their achievements? And so the book of Deuteronomy tries to make clear that it is God and God alone that is the source of all of Israel's worth, wealth, and happiness in the world. And so in the 18th verse, it says, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers as at this day. He wants to prove to those who come after you that the covenant was real, and so he gives you success in order that others may obey God. God gives them things in order that others may obey God, because to see what God can do. If the nation ever deteriorated to a point where they no longer took the covenant agreement and their obligations to God seriously, it would be doomed to destruction. And so we ended our scripture lesson with the words, if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods. Isn't that always the case? Go after other gods. We ought to be able to identify with that, because we love to tiptoe through the tulips after other gods. If you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you this day that you shall surely perish. If you think some other God or some other people's God or some other people's religion or some other people's history or some other people's origins are more important and more prestigious than your own, then God will destroy you. The covenant and the law bound Israel together as a communal group, giving them access to the limitless spiritual power of God. When Israel took the covenant seriously, God could speak to them, and God could act through them in the world to change the human condition. God could use them to do what God needed done. Israel, as a covenant people living communally together in accordance with the law, became God's instrument for the realization of divine will in the world. So it's not just for Israel that they should obey the law, but it was for the whole world, because God was going to use Israel to deal with the world. It was on that basis that God became such an active, vibrant presence in the collective life and affairs of Israel. God parted the Red Sea when they were fleeing from Pharaoh, led them through the wilderness with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, rained down manna from the sky for them to eat when they were hungry, brought forth water from a flinty rock. He did all kind of miraculous deeds in order not only to save Israel, but to prove to Israel that God was with them and God was leading them away from their bondage. God, for the black nation Israel, was a crucial and essential part of their shared existence as a people. They defined and interpreted the quality of their collective national life in terms of their relationship to God. Their relationship to God was determined by the degree to which they abided by the covenant agreement. When they were serious about the covenant agreement, their religion was good. They had good religion. It was good because it enabled God to work in their life and do what God had promised to do. When they did not abide by the covenant agreement, their religion was not good for them. It was not good because God could not become a part of their lives and fulfill the covenant promises he had made through Abraham. And so good and bad religion depended upon how much the people abided by what God had obligated them to be and to do. And God became such a vibrant part of Israel's life when they were abiding by the covenant. Now we marvel at how alive and active God was in the earthly affairs of Israel. The Bible for us is really like a Hollywood fantasy, isn't it? It's like going to a movie, to one of those Schwarzenegger movies or Stallone movies or Steven Seagal movies. The Bible is the same way. It's a Hollywood fantasy because it represents a religious world starkly different from our own, doesn't it? Like you read the Bible and you read about the world and the relationship to God that Israel had, and then you look out at the world and the relationship to God we have, you say it's not the same. It's a wholly different world. That's why the biblical characters take on a larger-than-life existence for us. They do not even seem to be regular people like us, do they? I mean, we don't think of the people in the Bible like we think of ourselves, do they? Like somehow they're different from us. They're not human beings. They didn't go through the same problems. They didn't have the same difficulties, the same insecurities, or the same hypocrisy, or the same pretense, or the same fears, or the same insecurities as we do. I mean, they were different because God was speaking to them. God ain't speaking to us. So they're different from us. And so they seem larger than life. When we consider people like Abraham, Moses, the prophets, Jesus, his disciples, they appear to us to occupy a realm of existence inaccessible to us. We don't think of Moses and look at ourselves and say, I could speak to God like Moses, or Moses, I could be like Moses, God could speak to me in the same way. We don't think of it as, there was Moses, wow, think of Moses, he was so bad. We don't think of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel in the same way. We don't think that God could prophesy to us. We don't think like Jeremiah that we were formed in the womb by God and God knew us before we were born and God had a plan and a destiny for us that would fulfill divine will. We don't feel that way. We don't think like Jesus. Certainly we don't think we're like Jesus, because Jesus was God in our minds. At least that's what the white man told us. He was God, and we certainly believe everything he told us. So he's like God. Certainly we could say we'd be like Jesus. We'd be like Jesus when Jesus got here. God. We were not born of a virgin. So we certainly cannot be like Jesus or his disciples in the upper room at Pentecost. No way do we can compare ourselves to the key individuals and characters of the Bible. They seem to be in a world we don't have any access to. In the course of practicing religion, we do not really expect to encounter God in the same way as they did, do we? But when you read the Bible, you look at the world in which you live and you read the Bible, it's not the same. There's no way that God is involved in the lives of people today that we can see as as God was in the days of the Bible. So we're reading a fantasy, a fairy tale, a Mother Goose story, or a Dr. Seuss, or something else. It's got nothing to do with us. That's why we marvel at it, because it's so different from our own life. We wish that God would be in our lives as God was in the life of Israel. When we deal with God in religion, it's based primarily on some idea, some concept, or some opinion we have picked up from others. We are not really all that religious. Our religion is an idea. You know, somebody told us this is what you do to be religious, and so we are carrying out what somebody has told us is religion. It's got nothing to do with an experience of religion. It has something to do with somebody told us about religion. We have no personal witness of great signs and wonders performed for us as a people by God, do we? That we can recount. We have no recorded history of God's miraculous intervention into our collective lives that we can pass on to our children, can we? Like in Deuteronomy, the writer says, tell your children what God has done for the nation. Sit them down at your knee and record all the events. Tell them about the Red Sea. Tell them about the wilderness. Tell them about all the things that happened to your ancestors that got you to this point. Tell them what God did, the beautiful and the miraculous and wonderful things God did for Israel. We can't sit our children down and say, now listen here, son, I'm going to tell you about all the good and miraculous and wonderful things God has done for black people over the last few hundred years. All the things he has done to raise us up. We don't have a story like that. We don't have a story about God in our national life in the way that Israel had a story about God in their national life. The only stories we know to tell our children about God's active intervention in the earthly lives of a people are those recorded in the Bible about Israel thousands of years ago. So we become chained and paralyzed by the Bible into a world we do not even relate to our own. So we can't even compare the two, because we say, now this is what it used to be. It ain't like that anymore, and probably never will be again. So we cannot make the Bible a living part of our own existence, because we cannot believe that God would be in our world in the same way that God was in Israel's world. If we can talk personally about God at all, it's usually related to some obscure past event that we only later come to associate with God. You know, you think about 10 years ago, this happened to me. That must have been God. Now, you ain't sure who it was, but you say, that must have been God. God, I look back and say, God was dealing with me then. God was working stuff out for me. God was pushing me this way or pushing me that way. You guessing, though. You're not really sure it was God at all. You just say if that hadn't happened, then some other things wouldn't happen. But you like to think it was God, but you're not sure it was God at all. But even in your memory of that event, it does not involve an experience of God. You're just remembering some event that's detached from an experience of God. It's detached from any heightened experience of consciousness, commitment, and power that you had at that moment. You don't remember being infused by the power of God, being taken over by the reality of God, being led out of your mind by an encounter with God. You don't have any of those experiences. It's just an event that only later can you somehow vaguely associate with God. It was not an experience in any way comparable to that of Moses at the burning bush, was it? You can't say like Moses at the burning bush, I went to the burning bush and I saw a bush that did not consume itself, was on fire, and yet it was not turning to ashes. Now, you can't say that. Wasn't that kind of experience. You can't say like Isaiah, I was in the temple and a big bird swooped down on me with hot coals and pressed them on my tongue and still did not burn or singe my skin. You can't say that, can you? Because I saw a bird came in, I was praying in the temple and swooped in, and then God came through the temple and said, who will go for me? Who can I send? And I said, I will go. Send me. Here I am, your servant. No, you can't say that. You can't say like Jesus at the River Jordan that you went in and you got baptized and the heavens opened up and a dove descended on your shoulder and you said, heard the voice of God saying, in you, you are my beloved and whom I'm well pleased. You can't say that. You can't even say like the disciples that you were with a group of people in an upper room and all of a sudden the whole house started shaking and a rush of a mighty wind came blasting through and there were tongues of fire dancing over every head. You can't even say that. Can you say that? You can't even say that. You can't say that. You really don't know much about God. It's something you heard, something you read in the Bible. But it has nothing to do with what the people in the Bible were dealing with. They weren't dealing with words about God. They were dealing with an experience of God. That's why you marvel, because God's so intimate to them, it's so detached from you. The problem we have is that our whole approach to religion involves beliefs and practices that actually isolate us from God. See, we don't really know every time we come into the church, even though we may be rolling in the aisle, spitting up and preaching, breathing hard and everything else, it's not bringing us closer to God, it's separating us from God because we don't know what we're doing in that building. All we know about what we're doing is something we've been taught on slave plantations over 100 years ago that we forgot we were taught on slave plantations. When the white man brought us here from Africa in chains, we knew something about religion then. And we had a religion that had power. And he was afraid of the black man's religion. So he refused to let the black man practice his religion. He wouldn't let him go off and get no drum because he knew when the black man started beating the drum, something strange happened all around him. He couldn't deal with that. Let them beat no drums now. Because the drum represented the pulse beat of God. It stirred us up. It brought us out of our ordinary mind into the mind of God. And we exploded into a new reality. And we didn't feel like slaves anymore when the drum was beaten. And when the drum was beaten, we fought against slavery. So the white man said, let's take away the drum. We can't let them go out there in the woods and start talking in language we don't understand about a God they believe in that has nothing to do with our own God. And so at first they wouldn't give us no religion. And then later on, they said, well, we give them some of our own religion and alienates them from God, does not allow God to be an active, intimate part of their national life. That's the religion they gave us. That's the religion they passed on us. That's the religion that black people have. We have been conditioned by our oppressor to reject our African origins and the religion that is part of it. African people created religion. The white man stumbled into Africa and learned a little bit of religion. Then when he stumbled back into Europe, he forgot the little bit of religion he had learned when he stumbled into Africa and messed up all religion. And so now all the religion that he passes on is not religion because it alienates people from God. Look at the world he's created. Does it have anything to do with God? Look at the world he's created. Is God involved in it in any way? You can't say that. The white man has a religion that sanctioned the African slave trade, sanctioned plantation slavery, sanctioned the lynching and castration of black men, sanctioned Jim Crow and sharecropping and tenant farming, sanctioned colonialism. His religion has sanctioned all of that. What does that have to do with God? Nothing at all. That's the religion he gave us. His religion. That helped him rule the world in the name of his God, which wasn't really God at all. We've been conditioned to reject our African origins and accept a Eurocentric Christianity for us that is neither healing, transforming, or empowering. Our religion has helped us endure slavery. And I guess if you can't get a religion that will help you overcome slavery, the next best thing is to have one that help you endure slavery, right? Because maybe you can endure it long enough, you wake up and say, hey, we need another religion, because all this one is doing is helping us stay slaves and not just give up. But we need now to not just have a religion that helps us endure slavery and not give up. We need a religion now that helps us to fight against and destroy the slavery that has been controlling us for so long. You understand what I'm talking about? No, y'all don't understand what I'm talking about. You don't understand what I'm trying to say, You don't hear me, but I'm going to keep on talking. You don't hear me, but I'm going to keep on talking. He gave us a religion that in no way threatened his world of racial oppression and exploitation. He came in and taught us religion. The first preachers to black people were white preachers. Now, you know you got to be suspect then, right? I mean, you know you got to, like, if you knew the history of black people learning Christianity, you would be suspect. Because we learned Christianity from a white preacher in the middle of slavery. So that would make any thinking black man or woman question everything we ever learned about Christianity. Because there's got to be something wrong with that kind of Christianity, shouldn't it? And you got to start thinking. You can't keep walking in these churches with your mind turned off, with your brain blank. You know, you got to start thinking about religion. Some black people who are trying to think said that the fact that Christianity helped to keep black people oppressed and in bondage meant that religion was irrelevant. That how could we worship a God and practice a religion that seemed to sanction the brutal enslavement of black people? That's a reasonable position. That's a logical position. If Christianity is a co-conspirator with our oppressor to keep us oppressed, then we'd have to question Christianity, shouldn't we? At least the one we have learned, at least the one that has been spoon-fed to us, we'd have to question it. But we don't like to think about religion. And all the times we think, the least the time we think is in the church. We don't want to think in the church. We turn our minds off. There's a button on our brain that says off, on. When you walk in the door, you say, Jesus saves, and the button goes off, and you walk in, and nothing else makes sense. Nothing else makes sense. But it doesn't have to make sense because you turned your mind off when you walked in that church. So a preacher stands up in the pulpit and talks and says absolutely nothing from the beginning and end and starts humping and hooping and hollering, and you start jumping up with him. Oh, Jesus, come save me. Oh, Jesus, oh, Jesus. Now, what are you jumping around about? What exactly are you jumping around? He hasn't said nothing about nothing that's got nothing to do with your real life. He hasn't talked about your oppression, your enslavement, your exploitation, the treachery of your enemy. He has said absolutely nothing about your real life. Absolutely nothing. I heard a whole sermon on TV. I watch them. I wonder, and black people be filled in these places. And I keep scratching my head. How did they sit here? This person ain't said nothing about nothing. Just sat in there and talking about how you're not the child of God. The God is not your father. You have to be adopted into the household and family of God. And Jesus is head of the adoption agency. And I'm saying, this niggas ought to just get up and walk out now. Ought to get up and walk out. What is he talking about? What is he talking about? What is he talking about? Ain't talking about nothing. Yeah, but here they are. That's right. He ain't said nothing. The whole thing doesn't make sense. Black people sitting in churches right now, somebody makes absolutely no sense, and black folks nodding their head in agreement. Because all have conspired, including the preacher, to turn their brains off when they come into church. All of the religion we have in no way threatens our condition of racial exploitation and powerlessness. Marcus Garvey understood 70 years ago the centrality of religion to any people's life, and also the corrupt religion that black people had been given by white people. Marcus Garvey knew religion was important, but he also knew the religion given to us is corrupt. It destroys black people, it doesn't help black people. It helps to perpetuate our oppression, not deliver us from our oppression. Garvey said that man is a religious being. Man's religion is something we cannot eliminate from his system or destroy in him. This is true whether or not you are conscious of it or believe in God. You are part of God whether you want to be or not. You are a part of God carrying on life in a divine system which emanates from God. So you say, I don't believe in God. It don't make a difference if you believe in God or not. God is the entity and the reality of the universe that shrouds the universe and permeates the whole universe. So it doesn't make any difference if you believe in it. You are part of God. You're part of a divine system. The problem with you not believing in it is that you can't really get any benefit from God, not believing there is a God. So you walk around with absolute limitless power all around you, but because you don't believe it's out there, you can't access it. So all you're doing is messing yourself up, living on the periphery of life, marginalized in terms of the power you have access to, because you won't believe in the basic reality of God. But that doesn't make any difference. God doesn't require you to believe in God and not believe in God. God is out there. Now you can believe and get the power, you cannot believe and have no power. It's up to you. But we live in a divine system which emanates from God. God is all around us, all around us. In his opening address at the 1924 UNI convention, which canonized Mary as a black Madonna and Jesus as the black Messiah, Garvey dealt with the importance of religion for black people. He said, let it be understood once and for all that no constructive program for the black man can be effective which underestimates the hold his religious institutions have upon him. The material without the spiritual is as bad, nay worse, than the spiritual without the material. We must have the anchor of religion, but we must make certain that it is what we consider conscientious for us as black people. We need religion, but we just don't need any religion. We need a religion that's good for us. Now, probably the religion that's good for us ain't going to be good for white folks. Y'all don't want to deal with that, so y'all don't want to deal with that. Don't want to deal with that. Ain't no way we can have a church, a black church, in this world where race is an overriding factor in the human condition, and sit up in a church with black people and white people claiming to worship the same God and the same Jesus. That is not possible. Not possible. It is not possible. If the oppressor and the oppressed are worshiping the same God, somebody's at a disadvantage, aren't they? Somebody's at a disadvantage. We don't want to deal. We love it. Well, we got some white folks in our church. That means you just go to an ignorant church. That's all. You just go to an ignorant church. We got to have a religion that's conscientious for us as black people. That's what Garvey said. The weekly mass meetings of the UNIA held on Sunday evenings took on the atmosphere of a church service with special prayers and the singing of spirituals. And Bishop George McGuire, the chaplain general of the UNIA, developed a universal black ritual for use in the organization that contained forms and prayers and hymns and special services which included a baptism and dedication of infants. Now this is interesting, because in this baptism, the children of the UNIA not only became Christians through baptism, but also official members of the UNIA when they were baptized. So Garvey didn't separate God from history, God from human life, the sacred from the secular, if the spiritual disciplines and rites didn't have some relationship to the worldly experience, and what value do they have? So when a child was baptized, not only did you become open to God and the community through which God works, you become part of the organization that's going to liberate black people. So you incorporate it into a multi-purpose function and structure. It was a beautiful thing, way beyond what black people can conceptualize today in terms of religion. In many of Marcus Garvey's speeches, he would quote from Psalm 68, "Princes shall come forth out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands unto God." Garvey would say that all the time. It was Garvey's way of reiterating the centrality of God to their movement and the liberation of black people. Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands to God. God is going to do something for black people. God is going to resurrect black people. God is going to liberate black people. This is the core of Garvey's ideology and his program. Marcus Garvey and the UNIA were engaged in a very difficult but essential task of completely changing the theological foundation of religion for black people. We do need new religion. Garvey realized black people need new religion, and so he sought to create it. Reverend John Gordon, a Baptist minister from Los Angeles, and the Assistant President General of the UNIA, talked about the UNIA's effort to change and restructure religion for black people. He talks about in a speech in Boston in 1921, he says, in a speech to Boston audience, Gordon compared the UNIA with religious organizations and claimed that the white man's religion had met its Waterloo, and that the Honorable Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association had found the missing link in the Christian church. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Found the missing link in the Christian church. The UNIA would not simply be content with new organizational forms, Gordon declared, for the Negro people of the world will have to reconstruct the theology of the church in order to hasten the building up of the morale of the black people all over the world. And Garvey said, our theologians are at work rewriting white theology as to make it pertinent to the needs and experience of the black man. Now that's a long way from where black people are today. We don't even realize that we're in a black church, when we're in a seminary, be it white or black, we learn in white theology. ITC, it teaches white theology, as well as Emory teaching white theology. It's all teaching theology that keeps black people worshiping God in ways that is not liberating, does not deliver us from our oppression. Garvey recognized that 70 years ago. And the core of Garvey's new black theology was his conception of the nature of God. Garvey says in the lesson guides for a school of African philosophy, he says this: there is a God and we believe in him. He is not a person nor a physical being. He is a spirit. He is universal intelligence. Never deny that there is a God. God, being universal intelligence, created the universe out of that intelligence. Now Garvey was making a theological statement that black theologians couldn't even make today. Couldn't even make today. God is not a man. He is a universal mystical intelligence out of which all things are created. All things come out of the intelligence of God. God is not a person. God is a universal intelligence that covers and permeates the whole universe. And everything is a projection or an emanation from this intelligence. Marcus Garvey, 70 years ago, rejected the anthropomorphism of white Western Christianity. This foolish notion long ago rejected by African people that God is a big man up in the sky, dealing with each individual's personal life and problem. Don't you think that? He's a big man. There's a big man up there somewhere, up above the cloud, with deep space, deep space up there. And he's sitting on his throne, and he got a big staff, and he got a book with your name in it. And when you pray, a telephone rings, and he presses your line and says, oh, this is Bobby. I got Bobby's prayer on the line. Bobby wants a house note. And then he figures out how to give Bobby a house note. Ain't that the way you think about God? The whole thing is ridiculous, but you never think about the ridiculousness of religion. So you think he's up there with a book with 6 billion people on the planet, and God got a book with 6 billion names and a telephone line with 6 billion connections. So when you come up, God can separate your prayer from everybody else's prayer and deal with your prayer personally. That's what you think. That's what you think. And you wonder why we can't do nothing with religion. Functioning religion on that primitive basis. The rejection by Garvey of the concept of God as a big man up in the sky. And I know you have a hard time not believing God as a big man up in the sky. I know that. I'm not telling you something I know you find easy to believe. You say, well, what else is he? How would I talk to him? How would he help me? I know you got it all messed up in your mind. You don't know what it is anymore. But the rejection of Garvey, the concept of God as a big man up in the sky, and his declaration that Jesus was a black Messiah sent by God to deliver a nation, represented a radical theological evolution in thought that the contemporary black church and black people today have yet to comprehend or accept. It's way beyond where we are theologically today. 70 years ago, Marcus Garvey was saying something that 70 years later, black people still are unable to understand. Thinking we were able to understand it systematically, we would be way beyond where we are theologically in terms of how we deal with religion. The black church is still tied to the backwards, primitive, corrupt theological notions given to us by our slave masters. A set of theological notions that have helped to keep black people oppressed, exploited, and powerless in a hostile, racist, white world of power. The black church, with all of its good and noble intentions, and it's good to have a homeless shelter, and it's good to have a soup line, and it's good to have a prison ministry, and it's good to have all of the things that the black church has. None of it is revolutionary, and none of it is liberating, but it's good to have them. At least it helps people to endure injustice. But the black church, with all these things, simply does not have the theology to be God's agency for the liberation of black people and redemption of the world. It couldn't do it. A black preacher can get up and start talking about what they're going to do for black people, but he is theologically bankrupt or deficient, so he cannot really do much for black people except open up the church and let the homeless sleep on the floor. He can't stop homelessness. He can't liberate black people from the unemployment and the poverty that black people experienced that drove them into the church in the first place. All he can say is, I got a building, and we got some money, and we're going to buy some soup, and we're going to buy some bologna, and we're going to fix y'all some sandwiches and soup, and you can have that. But we can't do nothing about the reason why you got to come in here begging sandwiches and soup. We can't do nothing about that. We can't do nothing about that. Can't do nothing about that. He doesn't have the theology to even begin to comprehend how to deal with that. As we move into a position of complete economic obsolescence and uselessness in the white man's world, and that's where we are now. We are being squeezed by the modern technology out from our oppressor's world. We have less and less value to him economically. The religion we have been conditioned to practice by our oppressor is no longer any good. Because it's more than just enduring our oppression now. We got to overcome it because we have no value within our oppressive state anymore. He doesn't need us anymore. So he's cutting back everything it would take to keep us alive. He kept us alive because he needed us to work. He needed us to pick cotton. He needed us to pick beans. He needed us to go out there and get the tomatoes out the field. He needed us to make cars. He needed us to do all kinds of stuff. But now he's got mechanical machines that go through the field and pick for himself. He's got machines that put cars together. He got all kind of technology. So he doesn't need the black man anymore. So he's cutting back welfare. He's cutting back food stamps. He's cutting back Medicaid. He's cutting back all the affirmative action. All the things necessary to keep an oppressed people able to be exploited. He's cutting it out because he doesn't want to expend that money anymore for people that no longer have value to him. So what are we going to do about it? It's not good enough to think about Jesus. We can't have any consolation in the fact that Jesus died for our sins. Whatever he died for, it did not affect the white man and his relationship to us. It did not affect that. So we need something more than just knowing that Jesus died for our sins. So religion that black people practice is no longer good. It's not good religion for black people because it's incapable of dealing with our urgent earthly problems, surviving the changing global economics. It is not good religion because it does not enable the black church to mediate the healing, transforming power of God into our collective lives. The black church does not enable us to know God in the same way as Israel knew God, a source of national deliverance. We don't even conceive of God as a national deliverer. We don't even think of God as saying this is against God's will, our oppression. This is out of balance. The world is out of balance. Anywhere there's oppression, the world is out of divine balance. It's opposed to the will of God. And anywhere the world is out of balance, God focuses divine energy to bring the world back into balance. But we'd have to be willing to accept divine energy and believe that God is against what we are in now because it creates an imbalanced world, and say we open ourselves to the power of God in order that God can use us to bring the world back into balance. Give us the power of God to struggle against what the man has done to us in order that we can come back into balance and bring the world back in the way you wanted it to be. We'd have to believe that God is a national deliverer for those who are oppressed, but we don't believe it. We don't believe it. The Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church alone offers good religion to black people. Good religion. That is, if you're looking for good religion. You may not be looking for good religion. But if you're looking for good religion, we got it here. It's good religion because we have been psychologically able to reject the corrupted Christianity given to us by our oppressor. And that in itself is a major accomplishment. Anytime any group of black people can get together and reject what white people have told them is truth, they have made a significant theological, evolutionary, intellectual leap. A significant leap. Anytime. Any group of black people who disagree with white people, you need to attach yourself to them. Because they found a strength that other black people wish they had. Because black people have a hard time being intellectually disagreeable with white people. We have to believe everything they said. So we are intellectually disagreeable with white people. We do not believe anything they said. We don't care how many libraries they got, how many books they wrote, how many movies they made. We just simply do not care. We disagree. We disagree.
We disagree. The majority of the black population will not be able to disagree with the white man. And that includes the majority you hear. The majority you hear are trying hard as you can to disagree with me. Your brother, a black man who loves you more than any white man would ever love you. Your brother, and you want to disagree with me. You want to disagree with me, and you want to agree with Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole and Phil Graham and the Pope and all the rest of the white folks that keep you down on the bottom and disagree with your brother. But I understand the problem. Very few black people can reach the intellectual stage of being able to disagree with the oppressor, to disagree with the white man. But we are pulling together black people in every little city, every little click and corner, we find them. A disagreeable black man, a disagreeable black woman, all coming together to make a disagreeable nation against our oppressor. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do. Over the last 20 years, we have been involved in refining and upgrading the revolutionary black theology of Marcus Garvey. We alone. We recognize that God is the infinite field of cosmic energy and creative intelligence, out of which all things are created and within which all things exist. We know we live in a divine system. We live, moving, being within the existence of God, which is the center of a divine system. There's no place we have to go to meet God. We don't have to shoot off up here, out of here to meet God. We don't have to give faith in Jesus to meet God. We are able to meet God in the same way that everybody else in the Bible met God, by a faith and a commitment and obedience to God's law and God's obligation. We are open up to God. God is all around us and within us. God's existence is both immanent and transcendent. That's a state of being no big man in the sky can possess. No big man in the sky can be both transcendent and immanent. Either he's up there or he's down here. He can't be both places at the same time. It's just the law of physics won't allow that. Only a God that does not exist in a material form can be immanent and transcendent. Being away from or disconnected from God is impossible. That whole idea of born in sin is ludicrous. You can't be born in sin because you're born out of the substance of God. How can you be born out of the substance of God and also be born in sin at the same time? It's impossible. We are born out of and live our total lives within the substance and reality of God. But we can become unaware of our union with God. We can become so blocked and contracted in our living, so individualistic, so selfish, so paranoid, so full of inferiority feelings, so insecure, so desensitized to other people that we cannot experience the continuing presence of God. So we don't know God the way Moses or Isaiah or Jesus knew God, because we have lived a life and accepted a group of attitudes that keep us isolated from the reality of God. But we can never become disconnected from God. We can walk all in the body of God and not know we're in the body of God because we have created blocks and barriers to an awareness of our being in the body of God. The role of the church is to bring seekers together, to bind them to one another within a communal fellowship as a necessary requirement for them to experience the continuing presence of God in their lives. That's what we're here for. We want to know God like Moses and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Jesus and Simon. We want to know God the same way. We don't want to have to go back to the Bible and talk about what great things God did and how God was speaking to people. We want to be able to look back and say, I'm going to open my diary and go in here and recount how God spoke to me, how God was using me, how God was in my life. I was looking at my diary. I didn't go back to the Bible. I read my own life story, my own autobiography, and that will tell you the story of God's involvement in human affairs. That's what we want to be able to do. That's the role of the church, the communal fellowship of the Christian church. Here in this church alone, we can access the spiritual power to deal effectively with our earthly problems by building together a black nation, a foundation to secure and protect our lives and prepare a future that is worth living for our children. We can't just bring our children to church and tell them, well, here's the church, son, and the basis of this is when you die, you're going to go to heaven. What kind of father going to bring their son into a church he's catching hell in the street. White man kicking him out in the street, beating him down, shooting him down, putting dope all in the community, making sure that they all drugged up so they can't do anything. And then you're going to bring him into a church and say, son, all you got to do is when you die and go to heaven, well, he might as well keep on taking dope and die sooner so he can get there sooner. Why bring him into a church talking about nothing, talking about dying and go to heaven? If you're a black parent, don't abuse your child like that. It'd be better for you not to take him to church than to take him to church with some white man on the wall, some white man in the book, and they're waiting for some white man to deliver them. You do better by not taking them at all. God is the God of a group. God is the God of a nation. God is the God of a world, and God is the God of a universe. God is not the God of isolated individuals. Religion only has value and power when it conceives of God on that basis, as a national delivering force, seeking always to bring the world back into balance. The Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church is the only church dealing with God in that radical way, in that intelligent way, in that progressive way, in that vanguard manner. We're the only ones. Now, you can stumble back into a Baptist church and hear that old-time religion that's going to take you off somewhere after you die, but you don't plan on dying real soon, I hope. So you need to be in some place that is focused on how to live rather than deal with the fear of death. That's what you need. The issue before us this morning is are you ready for that kind of religion? Huh? Are you ready for that kind of religion? Are you ready for a Christianity that reconnects you to your African origins? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for that? Are you ready to practice a Christianity that declares Jesus was a black Messiah sent by God to liberate a black nation? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for that? Are you ready to practice a Christianity that can bind you into a communal fellowship with other black people that can mediate the limitless energy and power of God into our collective lives? Do you want a religion like that? Are you ready for a religion like that? Do you want a Christianity that can deliver you and your children out from a dismal, debilitating, depressing state of racial oppression, exploitation, and powerlessness? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for that? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Well, since I know you're ready for that, I had to get these few little questions out the way. I had to figure out what kind of group I'm dealing with here this morning. I had to know where your mind was and where your heart was and where your soul is. I had to ask all them questions to get to understand where you were. Because I didn't want to take you someplace you wasn't ready to go. You wasn't ready to go. You wasn't ready to go. You understand what I'm talking about? I understand what I'm talking about. So, since I asked you all those questions, I guess I can ask you the question. What time is it? Nation time means there's nothing more sacred than the liberation of black people. Nation time means the rejection of individualism. Nation time means total commitment to the black liberation struggle. Nation time means putting aside integration and loving our own black selves. Nation time means a Christian nationalist time. BCN brings us all together as one people. Umoja. BCN leads the way to a black communal society. Ujamaa. BCN builds power for black freedom. Uhuru. BCN is the answer. Umoja. Ujamaa. Uhuru. We need black brothers and sisters who give, who work, and train to serve the black nation. Ujamaa. We need black brothers and sisters who are willing to die for the black nation. Uhuru. We all remember Jesus, the black Messiah, Nat Turner, Brother Marcus Garvey, of Brother Malcolm and millions who died for black liberation. Uhuru! Across the whole wide world, which we once ruled as black men and black women, into which we brought the gifts of civilization, religion, and science, we now stand powerless and enslaved. Uhuru! Those scattered and powerless, we are an African people. Let the black nation rise. Uhuru! We cannot be free until our motherland Africa and all black people everywhere are free. Let the black nation rise. Uhuru! All right, we reject identification with our oppressor and accept a new value system and lifestyle taught by the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church. Let the black nation rise. Umoja, Ujamaa, Uhuru. Let the black nation rise. Uhuru, 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 Uhuru. Oh yeah, 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 I don't know about you. I can look at some of y'all don't believe this, do you? You don't believe no black nation gonna rise, do you? That brother over there, he don't believe no black nation. Look at him sitting down, he don't believe no black nation, but that's okay. It's the power of the group that believes that overcomes the few who disbelieve. We believe. We believe in black people. We believe in him. We believe in him. We believe in him. We believe in her. We believe in her. We believe in all black people. We believe in. And when we rise, they gonna rise too, whether they want to rise or not. Because when the race rises, the race rises.